Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the January 22nd Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are in the traditional territories of the Stamo First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw number 2018, number 7272. The question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left for agenda items only. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. Members have been granted the authority to join meetings electronically, and I don't believe we have anybody electronically today. Not seeing anybody. The first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For late items today, we have 7A, Roadway Asphalt Asset Management and Maintenance Plan. We're adding the report titled Roadway Asphalt Asset Management and Maintenance Plan. And that's it, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Gurry. May I have a motion for the adoption of agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Manley, seconded by Councillor Thorpe. All in favor? Seeing none opposed, motion passes. Motion for the adoption of minutes is circulated. Moved by Mayor Krogh, seconded by Councillor Hemmons. All in favor? Motion carries. Agenda planning. Governance Priorities Committee agenda planning. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you again, Chair, and good afternoon. So on page 23 of your original agenda is the upcoming topics and initiatives page for your GPC meetings. We have the meetings scheduled out until the end of April, April 29th, 2024, with items that either members of the committee and or staff have promised or committed to bringing forward to you. So as you can see, today's items listed for January 22nd. For February 12th, 2024, we have One Port Drive, active transportation, several reports and topics to do with that. We have in March 11th, development approvals process review, so an update on that, as well as development approvals procedures and notification bylaw update. Alternative approval process, that deeper dive that was requested, and dam safety review. And in March, we have Bill 44, secondary suite, multi-unit housing, increasing housing options, Bill 47, transit-oriented areas, short-term rental review, and in April, city plan monitoring strategy and city plan monitoring committees. So that is what is scheduled, and now if council has any other topics that they were hoping to have added or discussed, you could put that motion on the floor now to be added. And if not, I'll be happy to answer any questions about the future topics and initiatives.
Any concerns or topics, council? Seeing none, I guess then we can move on. Thank you, Ms. Gurry. Presentations. First, we'll start with provincial housing legislation overview to be introduced by Lisa Brinkman, Manager of Community Planning. Ms. Brinkman.
Good afternoon, everybody. So this presentation is about 4 housing-related bills that were enacted by the provincial legislature in October and November 2023, and also an overview of how these bills will have the implications for Nanaimo. These 4 bills are key components of the Provincial Homes for People Action Plan. So the first is Bill 35, which is about the short-term rental accommodations. Bill 44, residential development. Bill 46 is regarding development financing. And Bill 47 is transit-oriented areas. While Bill 35 and 46 create opportunities that the city may choose to utilize, Bill 44 and Bill 47 create obligations that the city must achieve by certain times in 2024 and 2025. These bills represent a huge shift in land use planning and the development approval process in BC, more change than I have seen in my 23 years as a planner. This will be a lot to process today, but don't worry, there'll be many more details to come in the coming months to help us all learn about and adjust to these new changes. Staff from current planning and community planning are leading many of these projects resulting from these bills, and we are already being well supported by staff in engineering, GIS, finance, building, transportation, and others. Okay, starting with Bill 35. The goal of the Short-Term Rental Accommodation Act is to return short-term rentals to the long-term housing market, and the Act provides tools to support local governments in the enforcement of short-term rental bylaws. For example, the fine a local government may issue has been increased from $1,000 per day to $3,000 per day for each infraction. Also, Bill 35 limits short-term rentals to the host's principal residence plus one secondary suite or accessory dwelling unit. The City of Nanaimo already has more restrictive regulations, so this will not be new for Nanaimo. What is new is that short-term rental platforms such as Airbnb or VRBO will be required to remove listings that do not have a valid city business license, and listings must have a valid provincial registry number. Also, a data sharing system will be created that requires short-term rental platforms to provide listing information to the province. This is so the province can share that information with local governments so that we can do bylaw enforcement. So in March 2024, staff will present a report that provides a review of the short-term rental program in Nanaimo to date, options for enforcement, and will provide more details as how we can utilize these new tools in Bill 35. Oh. Okay. The next bill, Bill 44. This is the Housing Statutes Residential Development Amendment Act. And there are three main components to Bill 44. So the first is that an official community plan must accommodate 20 years of housing supply, and official community plans must be consistent with housing needs reports, which must be completed every 5 years. So this is new. Secondly, and this is new, and we don't hear much about this in the media, is that public hearings will be prohibited for rezoning applications that propose residential development that is consistent with the official community plan or city plan. And thirdly, Bill 44 requires local governments to allow small-scale multi-unit housing on land zoned for single-family or duplex residential use, and I'll expand on each of these a little bit more. So prior to November 2023, housing needs reports that were required by the Local Government Act were required to be 10 years. And so now, with this new legislation, we need to do 20-year housing needs reports. So,
Just going to stop you, Ms. Brickman. Councillor Manley has a question.
Sure.
I think you just,
Oh.
our current official community plan is 10 years for housing needs, or what was the plan that was just completed?
Correct. So city plan forecasted 25 years. It's a 25-year forecast. So I will get to that actually. But
Okay.
good question. So we will need, so that housing needs report that we presented in May 2023 will need to be updated, and that's something we will do by the end of this year. So it will be updated to be for 20 years. Next, a project Bill 44 is requiring us to complete is to review the official community plan, city plan, and the zoning bylaw to ensure they both can accommodate 20 years of housing needs. So we are in good shape. We just completed city plan in 2022, which accommodates 25 years of population growth. So we are quite confident that we did our proper long-range planning. However, we do anticipate we may need to do some amendments to city plan and the zoning bylaw to specifically meet these Bill 44 requirements and to reflect our 20-year housing needs report once it's done. Secondly, Bill 44 introduces significant changes to the public hearing process. So since the enactment of Bill 44, so it took place immediately, public hearings are prohibited in connection with a rezoning application that proposes a residential development that is consistent with city plan. Notification of an amendment to a zoning bylaw will still occur, and this notice must take place prior to first reading of a zoning amendment bylaw. Staff will be presenting more details regarding these public hearing changes to Council in March. We anticipate there will be an updated process for 3 scenarios: a process for when a public hearing is prohibited in relation to a zoning bylaw amendment. There'll be a process for when council chooses to waive a public hearing for a zoning bylaw amendment that's consistent with city plan. And then finally, there will be a change to our regular public hearing process for when we do have public hearings. The third part of Bill 44 is related to small-scale multi-unit housing, SSMUH, a new acronym you will hear much more about. The province defines SSMUH as secondary suites and single-family dwellings or duplexes, detached garden suites or coach house, a triplex, and townhomes. So the zoning bylaw will need to be updated by June 2024 to allow 3 to 4 units on lots zoned for single-family or duplex use. So lots less than 280 square meter in size are to allow a minimum of 3 units, and lots greater than 280 square meters in size are to allow a minimum of 4 units. And so you'll find some of the details of this regulation, of this Bill 44 in Regulation 673, which is connected to the bill. You might be wondering, in what building form will these 4 units take on each lot? And that's a good question. We have some flexibility with this, and we're exploring and reviewing what might work best. And some of that research we did and public engagement we did with the Increasing Housing Options Project can help inform the options that we have, and we'll present that to Mayor and Council for consideration. Bill 44 also requires that the city allow a minimum of 6 dwelling units on larger lots in proximity to transit stops with frequent service, and to remove parking requirements for this category. At this early stage of our analysis, it appears that Nanaimo's bus service does not meet the frequency threshold, so we may not need to accommodate this requirement in the short term. Yes, our bus frequency will increase, and will we need to meet this requirement in the future? We don't have an answer to that question yet, so still wondering about that ourselves. A manual was provided by the province on December 7th to assist staff working through all these changes, and we're attending webinars throughout January to assist us as well. So,
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Ms. Brinkman. 2 pieces. Going back to the public hearing, we're no longer able to hold a public hearing for a rezoning that is in line with our OCP, but there was a process there where we can waive a public hearing. Can you differentiate those, please? So I'm assuming if a development comes in that is outside of our OCP, then we can either choose to have a public hearing or not. I'm sorry, the public hearing thing is just a bit complex for me.
Sure. So first of all, when a rezoning application proposes a residential development that is consistent with city plan, then the public hearing is prohibited. Second scenario is if a development, any development, commercial or residential, is consistent with an official community plan or city plan, council may choose to waive the public hearing. So that isn't new. That's been the case for some time.
Right. Okay, thank you. That helps. The residential piece is the distinguishing factor for me. And then on to the slides we're reviewing now. I know there's been discussion of having pre-approved designs on laneway houses, so people don't if they know that their lot theoretically supports a laneway house or a carriage house, if we have some kind of done up plans that engineers have already put their stamp on, this looks great, where are we in that process? And would it in future potentially apply to the fourplexes? Like, I'm trying to think of how we would make this really easy for residents. And I know in other jurisdictions that does work. We have laneway houses that you can just pick off of the City of Kelowna website and say, I'm doing that one, and it fits, and we know it fits.
Sure. So at this stage, that isn't a project city staff are working on to come up with pre-approved sort of plans. So that isn't in our work plan at this stage. However, the province has announced that they are working on some pre-approved plans for that purpose.
For laneway houses, or for the fourplexes that they're now allowing, or for all of it?
That's a good question.
Thank you. So it's not in city's work plan to create these pre-approved. That's just something that we've dreamt of, if that would be a good idea in the future, but it looks like the province is going ahead and doing it. We're just not sure of the scope. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Have Councillor Thorpe?
Thank you, Chair. Through you, if I may. To Ms. Brinkman, initially at least, it seems clear to me that these bills, particularly Bill 44, represent massive changes. And although there's many aspects of them that I would personally support, there's some that I would struggle with because they seem, in my opinion, to take away local government autonomy over decision-making. And if I may, I'll address a question through the chair to Mayor Krogh. I'm just curious if the Urban Mayors group or anybody else that you are associated with have expressed any concerns or comments about these upcoming changes.
No, I have to move Ian off. Okay, now you're on.
Thank you. There has been some discussion around it. The general view has been to leave it to the Union BC Municipalities and the President to speak on behalf of these concerns, which have been raised by, I think it fair to say, the vast majority of municipalities across the province. There are some challenges, but there's also the political appreciation that it gets us out of having to deal with some ugly public hearings too. So there's a silver lining to what may be seen as a political cloud here. But yes, but as I say, it's really through UBCM, and we have basically, in a general sort of way, deferred to their position on it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. No further questions?
So the first Bill 44 related staff report that Lania Rowett and the current planning team will be bringing to you in March will be about the changes regarding the public hearing process. We do expect there will be fewer public hearings and notification will be required for each proposed change to a zoning bylaw. By June 30th, the zoning bylaw and off-street parking bylaw must be revised to align with Bill 44, and you will see a report in late March regarding this from staff. While Bill 44 is quite prescriptive, staff are currently doing analysis because decisions and options need to be considered. There may be implications related to infrastructure and servicing capacity in certain areas, potential hazard areas that cannot safely receive growth, and there are some tools and options we can work with to address these situations, so you'll hear more about that. Housing needs reports, so we will be required to present to you an updated housing needs report with 20 years of forecast by December of 2024, and then in 2025 we'll be working on tweaks to the city plan and zoning bylaw. Okay, Bill 46, development financing. So this one is to create an improved financing tool framework for the city to be able to pay for infrastructure and community amenities. So what is very new in Bill 46 is the opportunity for local governments to create an amenity cost charge bylaw. This is different than our current practice of negotiating for an amenity at time of zoning, although we can still do that. An amenity cost charge bylaw will allow the city to impose charges at the time of subdivision or building permit to pay for the capital costs of community amenities such as community centers, recreation centers, and libraries. The ACC bylaw must specify the amenities that will receive the funding and the charge or rate that is imposed per lot or per unit or per square floor meter, however we decide to do that, similar to a DCC bylaw in that way. A separate ACC reserve fund will be established and rules will apply as to how those funds can be used. Another part of Bill 46
I'm just going to stop you, Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Brinkman. The amenity cost charges, so our current community amenity cost policy allows, sorry, I got that language wrong, you know what I mean. We allow for developers to kind of pick and choose where they want to direct some of those funds. If we're introducing new arenas that they can direct their funds to that are, rather than being neighborhood or community specific or region wide, such as community centers, rec centers, and libraries, how do we determine where the funds are going to go? Like, is that a council decision to say, okay, for the next 10 years, we're going to put all of our community or amenity cost charges into a rec center. Is that our decision? Is that someone else's? When are we going to make that?
Through the chair. So, good question. The development of an ACC bylaw will be a process we go through together with staff, mayor, and council, and there is a public engagement component requirement as well. The province will be putting out a policy manual to help us learn what the steps are to do this. We haven't seen that yet. So, however, I do anticipate it to be very similar to the development cost charge bylaw process. We will need to select, I don't know what it will be, 1 or 3, things, centers or whatever it may be that we want to fund. It probably will be the most efficient way to do that, but it will be a mayor and council decision for sure. It will be a bylaw.
So at some
Something for us to look forward to doing.
In theory, based on what I heard you say, in theory, at some point we could, let's just take rec center and say, okay, that South End Community Rec Center, we're going to put all of our amenity costs in there. So a developer developing a tower in the north end is going to be, that cost, that amenity is going to be identified for them. And it's just a calculation of how much their development is going to cost.
These are exactly the kinds of questions we'll need to weigh as we go through that process. And we may want to, like you say, select something in the north end and the south end, or we may want to consider that equity. And I think another consideration, part of it is and I'm about to talk about development cost charges, but that is a project that the city is working on to increase, our development cost charge rates. So we'll want to look at what are those two rates combined and what's reasonable, right? So we'll have to look at a level of reasonableness. There may be options, high, medium, low, that we need to consider. Lots of decisions for us in the future. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. So Bill 46 also amends the Local Government Act with regards to development cost charges. And DCCs can now be collected for fire protection facilities, police facilities, and solid waste facilities. Prior to Bill 46, DCCs could only be used for sewer, water, drainage, parks, and roads.
Follow up on that from myself. Is that just facilities, or could it include like the purchase of a new fire truck or pumper truck or something, or is it only for facilities and maintenance?
It's a good question. I'm guessing it's just the actual building and site, and I'm not sure about, I shouldn't actually try and answer the question. There's so many questions we have.
Get clarification later. Thank you.
Yeah. Sure.
Sorry, Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Ms. Brinkman. So with the development cost charges, obviously we have a fund right now. Is it possible, because of this bill, that we might be able to use some of those funds, say, for our future police station or fire hall?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to move to the next slide, actually. Staff had already started the process to update the DCC bylaw. That's a project that's underway. And since Bill 46 opens up these possibilities, staff are reviewing the scope of work for that project to determine if we want to make use of this new opportunity. So you will get more information from staff about that. And
so we might be able to use the money that's already allocated for other things that was put in there for those DCC back, say, 5 years ago, whatever's still there might be able to be used in this way.
I don't believe so, no. So DCC bylaw is quite specific.
Yes.
So, what's being collected can only be used for what has been allocated.
So for clarification, there'll be 2 separate DCC bylaws, one for police, fire, and whatever, and then the separate one.
Or no, one for the past and one for the future.
There will be one DCC bylaw. There will be one DCC bylaw, and it will be a new DCC bylaw that it's a project in process anyways. And so we'll be able to collect DCCs not just for the infrastructure that we could previously, but now we can also collect for these 3 other facilities.
No, but I think the question is, could the money that was collected previously that's sitting in a DCC fund now be used towards the police facility?
Exactly.
It cannot, no.
Yeah, thank you.
I think I said everything there. Okay, Bill 47, the next bill. Transit-oriented areas. Another set of amendments to the Local Government Act, and along with Bill 47 is Regulation 674. So the rules that I'm about to present can be found in both Bill 47 and Regulation 674. Bill 47 is framed around a planning strategy to concentrate a higher density and diversity of land uses around a transit hub to leverage and make efficient use of public investment in transit infrastructure in that area. We know about this planning strategy in Nanaimo, and that is why City Plan establishes 7 urban centers for the purpose of making efficient use of transit infrastructure and servicing infrastructure. And this is where my bias comes in a little bit. Rather than allowing the city to determine our own transit-oriented areas based on geographic or local neighborhood conditions, as we did with City Plan, Bill 47 prescribes a catchment area, a perfect circumference with a 400-meter radius, and within that radius, the city must allow certain building heights and densities, and each TOA is 50 hectares. Also, within that circumference, within the TOA, the city cannot require a minimum number of residential parking spaces for each development. We can still have parking for commercial uses and for accessible parking. So in Bill 47 and the associated Regulation 674, the province is prescribing where the City of Nanaimo bus exchanges and surrounding transit-oriented areas must be. So that's Woodgrove Exchange, Country Club Exchange, and VIU Exchange. And by June 2024, the city must pass a TOA designation bylaw that identifies these 3 areas as well as the allowable prescribed height and density in those 3 areas. These are already designated as urban centers, these 3 areas, in City Plan. However, City Plan did not anticipate the perfect circles and radius that Bill 47 requires, so we may need to eventually make some adjustments to City Plan to accommodate that. What is the prescribed height and density, you're asking, in these TOA areas? So within the first 200 meters, so the inner circle, we are to require 10 stories and a floor area ratio of 3.5. And in the outer 200 meters, 6 stories with a floor area ratio of 2.5. City Plan already supports up to 12 stories in urban centers, so yeah. How will this work? If a development proposal in a TOA is not consistent with the zoning bylaw, a rezoning application is still required, and the city must support the Bill 47 prescribed building height and density in the development proposal. However, through the rezoning process, the city can still work with the landowner or applicant to secure necessary amenities or servicing requirements in some cases. This will be important to ensure these 3 urban centers are adequately serviced. And finally, the city can allow heights and densities greater than the minimum prescribed in Bill 47. So a TOA designation bylaw is required to be adopted by June 30th, 2024. Also, the city's parking bylaw will need to be updated to reflect the parking requirements I mentioned. And staff can expect a staff report later in March with more details about this piece as well. The province does encourage TOA plans for these urban centers, and this is consistent with City Plan. Our City Plan also says to do area plans for urban centers, and staff have already started a Woodgrove Area Assessment Project with the Complete Communities grant we received in October. Oops. Okay. So this slide shows an overview of our plan of action for the many projects that are resulting from the new provincial legislation. So from January to December, we will continue working on the DCC bylaw and start working on an ACC bylaw, which you will hear more about. In March, you can expect staff reports about the new public hearing process, about the Bill 35 short-term rental review and enforcement opportunities. In March, Planner Caleb Horn will present more details about Bill 44, SSMUH. At the same time, he also intends to present proposed amendments to the zoning bylaw resulting from the Increasing Housing Options project that we started in 2023. In March, Planner Kasia Began will present more details about Bill 47, required TOA designation bylaw. And the last half of 2024, we will work on the Housing Needs Report. And then in 2025 will be the updates to City Plan and Zoning Bylaw. We will have a communication strategy for each project to build community awareness. And you'll already find on the city's website links to the bills and regulations that I talked about today, and this presentation is posted there as well. Start that communication. So today was a high-level overview of these 4 statutes. Staff is learning new information every day. We still have many questions ourselves. However, happy to take any more questions you may have.
Councillor Hammonds?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Brinkman. That's a lot of information. And I'm sure there's going to be questions and answers that come. I may have gapped when you talked about the funding. We received provincial dollars to help us with the implementation of this. I want to say it was in the $600,000 range. Do we have that, and how are we using it?
Great question. Yes, the city did learn, I think it was December 24th, that we received $600,000, and it's part of the $51 million that the Minister of Housing promised to municipalities to help do this implementation. On Friday, we received an email with information about how the city may use those funds, so we can start putting our minds to what that might look like. I do anticipate possibly at the March Finance and Audit a proposal of how we may utilize these funds to help support the projects I talked about today. For certain, I do expect we will ask that funds be directed towards the ACC, the Amenity Cost Charge Bylaw project. We do expect to need a consultant for that, so I do think we'll be seeking council endorsement for that as part of those funds. But as for how the rest of it will be used, I can't say for sure at this stage.
I'm curious because I sense this is probably dominating your work days right now. Based on the content of this presentation, it's a lot to wade through. So are we able with those $600,000 to actually just pay our staff so they're able to navigate this? Or do we have to, and I hear you're probably going to say, this, we don't have that answer yet, but is it program specific, which seems frankly ridiculous because the amount of work that these new regulations have put on staff are significant.
I don't have the answer.
Thank you.
And my question is, on your communication strategy, I'm assuming you'll be going out to the developing community and builders to discuss the new impacts, or is there a separate thing for them that's put on by the government? Do you know?
The province has not offered any support in that regard, and I agree it would be important for the development community to understand these many changes, and so that is something we've been talking about, and we'll be sure to bring details about that.
So again, it falls onto the municipality to educate their, thank you. Okay. Not seeing any further questions. Thank you, Ms. Brinkman. Next, we'll move on to Mr. David Whitty to present a report titled Developing a Homelessness Action Plan for Nanaimo, Finding a Way Home. Mr. Whitty?
I'll just grab a glass of water.
Most certainly, because you're going to need one. Thank you for coming here and presenting us with your, I read the preamble and it was very good. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you. Nope, nope, I don't need that. Oops, I'm not going to talk about roadway maintenance, no. I could talk about this. I mean, I've done some of that work in the past with my engineering.
You got the wrong one on, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, there is no PowerPoint.
There is no PowerPoint, so you're fine.
So thank you very much. I appreciate your time and energy. And
Mr. Whitty, do you want questions as you go along, or do you want us to wait till you're finished?
maybe I should roll through it,
Okay,
if you don't mind. Does that work?
that's okay with council?
Good, thank you. So I very much appreciate your time and energy and commitment to Nanaimo. lots to be proud of and lots to be thankful for. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking the time to permit me to come and present on the topic of homelessness. And thank you for finding the time to read my report. I know it was a lot of reading for those of you who may have completed that task. I see homelessness as a significant issue for all of us. I simply had the time to research homelessness and had occasion to see firsthand what solutions look like. Those solutions were inspiring enough to get me to spend a lot of time pulling this report together. Today, I would like to highlight some of my findings and some other recommendations on how we can address homelessness in Nanaimo. But before I begin, I recognize that when you haven't been paid to do a study and a pro bono one, sometimes it doesn't get all the attention when you do, because I was a consultant for much of my life. And so I get that, but hopefully you've had the time to take a look at it. One of the things I think that I'd like to just take a couple of minutes before I start is that most of you see me as an academic, and I don't think you really understand that I'm actually more than an ideas guy, and I know that sometimes you say, oh, here's Whitty again with another idea. So in addition to building the largest landscape architecture and planning practice in the prairies up until the 90s, out of Winnipeg and Saskatoon, between 75 and 90, two projects I'm really proud of. If any of you have been to the Forks, in the mid-70s I wrote the founding plan for that, the Red and Assiniboine Rivers Tourism Recreation study, presented it to Ed Schreier and his cabinet, and the Forks exists today. And the founding document for that work was Dave Whitty's report. Wampum Independent Nations are also a client of mine. For 15 years I was a trusted advisor, negotiator, and if you know Morris Strong, when he was president of Ontario Hydro, he sat across from me and we talked turkey and finalized a negotiation agreement. So I've kind of been there, done some of this stuff. The other thing I wanted to mention is that over the course of my life, I've actually been a businessman and invested in numerous properties, undertook a subdivision, completed it in Kelowna. So as a former developer, I do understand the development business. And I also had a family business in Bowen Island with my son. We partnered, bought the Bowen Island pub, built a beer and wine store in 2016. It was best in British Columbia. So and then when I came to the West Coast after I did my doctorate, I joined Urban Systems as a director and partner. So I've had my hand in business and academia for a good part of my life. So as a result, I think my perspective is shaped by both business and academia. So today I stand here as someone who brings a mix of academic planning practice and business owner skills to the conversation about homelessness. It's an existential crisis, in my view, that will not be reduced without committed long-term effort. And as we enter this discussion, we need to recognize that there will always be some level of homelessness. Our goal should be to reduce it as much as possible. So before I review my findings, I do want to thank the city for its efforts that's been put into homelessness so far, because it is a challenge. And that includes supporting equitable housing, one of the key 5 items coming out of the Mayor's Infrastructure Committee, and now on the agenda of the Mayor's Leaders Table, and the support you've given for the recent warm shelters. There are a number of success stories related to the city's land contribution to supportive housing and the work with organizations such as Bolinas Housing Society. You have been hard at it, I get it. What I am proposing today is building on those efforts. So now let's look at some issues and opportunities around homelessness. All of my presentation is referenced in the report that you received. So, systemic homelessness has, and just bear with me as I read this, please. And as you can see, I've highlighted the pages I'm going to reference. So, systemic homelessness has become a challenging issue for many municipalities across Canada. Nanaimo is no exception. Some would call it a crisis. In August 2023, the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, Smart Prosperity Institute, and RealPAC, which consists of 130 of the largest commercial corporate companies in Canada do real estate, such as Bentall, Bosa, Brookfield, Cadillac Fairview, and a whole bunch of others, concluded that, and I quote, "Canada's housing crisis is worsening dramatically." This is August of this year. "Millions of people, particularly those with the lowest incomes, are facing rapidly rising housing costs, driven significantly by an extreme lack of supply of the right types of rental housing. This is driving a wave of new homelessness, eating up increasing percentages of workers' incomes and causing untold stress and suffering." Further, in July 2023, Ipsos Market Research stated that, quote, "More than half, 52% of Canadians report that they are $200 away or less from not being able to meet all of their financial obligations." What can be done to address this increasingly complex and challenging issue? This paper explores homelessness and offers suggestions for addressing chronic homelessness in Nanaimo. There have been no shortage of studies in Nanaimo to explore homelessness, and I'll cite a few. There was the 2008 Nanaimo Working Group on Homelessness. They concluded Housing First was something that the city should do. At that time, there were 173 homeless. Collectively as a community, we decided not to do that, and now we have 1,000 homeless, 173 to 1,000. We also did a study, 2018, Nanaimo Affordable Housing Strategy, as you know, and then a Nanaimo Action Plan to End Homelessness that came out of that, 2018. And we also, as you know, completed the Health and Housing Action Plan in 2020. All lots of really good work. Vision and principles in that 2020 plan, firm, clear, directional. And out of that work came the recommendation for the Systems Planning Organization in 2023 was formed and adopted by the city. I commend you for that. So, what about Nanaimo's homelessness? In 2020, the latest Nanaimo point-in-time homeless count, quote, found that most unsheltered people in Nanaimo are from the city, with 71.2% reporting that they lived in the city for at least 5 years, end of quote. It also noted that, quote, most respondents at 91% said they want to access permanent housing but find it difficult largely due to the cost of rent in the city, end of quote. So some of the factors leading to homelessness. There are a multitude of factors that lead to homelessness, such factors include those who require care due to mental health and brain injury issues but are not getting that care, those who have substance abuse issues, those who have aged out of childcare with no housing options, those who have family issues, those who have released from custody with little supports, and those who have lost their employment or the retirement income and then their accommodation. As the 2020 point-in count noted, the majority of homeless are those who have been displaced from their accommodation as a result of a host of factors related to loss of accommodation. The status quo. Current numbers suggest upwards of 800, that's the number that I had identified, but now we know it's closer to 1,000, are homeless. Those numbers suggest annual homeless numbers increase on average up to 30% per year. Assuming a lower increase of 20% per year in homeless people, by 2030, there would be upwards of 2,500 homeless in Nanaimo, unless significant action is taken to address homelessness. It is evident a do-nothing scenario is unacceptable. So, what about costs and other things related to those on the street? Well, this is an interesting one, and it kind of confirms, it does confirm something that came out of our own point in time here. Studies on Skid Row in Los Angeles point to the reality that homeless people do not want to live in the street. They don't want to live on the street. One study found that 90% of homeless people, when asked what they needed most, responded that they wanted to get off the street and have shelter. A 2020 point-in-time count here in Nanaimo also found 91% wanted to get out of homeless living and have access to permanent housing. With nowhere to go, it is not supporting that those who live on the street become victims of crime, victims of hunger, victims of substance abuse, victims of violence, and victims of premature death. I'm now page 16, so we're moving along. I believe that an order of magnitude of direct economic cost to society here in Nanaimo of keeping people on the street is approximately $21 million a year, and you can see in Table 1, I've calculated that in detail. That does not include the issues related to costs of long-term care needs for those who've experienced overdose and require long-term special care, those who have developed chronic illnesses from living outdoors without adequate care or personal health and hygiene, or those who have become dependent on substances and spiraled down into addiction, and those ultimately and often inevitably die on the streets or as a result of street life. And you'll see I've cited other work in there that confirms those kind of numbers. There needs to be rethinking of financial resource expenditures so that funds spent on a never-ending cycle of homelessness supports those living on the streets can be directed over the long term to appropriate housing and support services, which in itself leads to less homelessness and associated issues. In Finland, there's clear evidence that it is less expensive to invest in housing for homeless people than leaving them to fend for themselves as homeless people. Quote, when a homeless person gets a permanent home, even with support, the cost savings for the society are at least 15,000 euros per person per year in savings. What about the importance of keeping people housed? While much attention is paid to the visible homeless, there is a need to minimize the number of people who lose their accommodation and end up on the street. For instance, Medicine Hat, Alberta found early on in its homeless work that, quote, ending homelessness was easier on the upstream side than on the downstream. In other words, helping people keep their housing is both easier and less expensive than helping them afterward, end of quote. The role of the community is really critical in this too, and the success stories relate to communities that are behind these efforts. And I cited, when I was in Switzerland, Professor Jörg Dittmann, and spent time with him. If you've read the report, you would know. But he talked about, quote, in the importance of power of community, and then, quote, importance of neighborhoods in accepting their role in accommodating homeless people. So you can't do it alone. We need to do it collectively in this city if we're going to get this right. For Basel, it appears that the community, and that's Dittmann's from Basel, and as you, again, in the report, you know, I spent a lot of time talking about Switzerland and Basel. For Basel, it appears that the community working together to address homelessness is a key tool to move the homeless agenda forward successfully. Jamie Rogers of Medicine Hat also confirmed, and she cited in here, she leads their initiative, confirmed that much of the city's success in addressing homelessness can be attributed to a committed community and a variety of community-based supports. So implications for action. And one I'll just cite out here, and this. With significant financial costs associated with servicing the homeless in Nanaimo, approximately $21 million per year, there comes a crucial need to rethink and redirect such significant financial costs. So lessons from elsewhere, I won't go into those. I talked about Switzerland, and I talked about Finland in detail. And one of the things a few things I'll just summarize out of those findings. A long-term coordinated, holistic, integrated, and collaborative response, wonderful words for planners, right? We love those words, is essential to ensure a fulsome and robust response. Both Switzerland and Finland were in dire straits and were desperate for solutions before they realized that they had no other choice but to act, and act they did. Implications for action of that research of those two countries. 1, Housing First has proven successful in addressing homelessness. 2, political and administrative leadership is an important common element that is required to foster long-term success. 3rd, identifying a lead agency structure in addressing homelessness is essential to ensure coordinated and accountable action. And then 4th, Nanaimo must act because it now finds itself in a similar desperate situation with increasingly high homeless numbers and associated acute health issues. And then I had lessons from Canada, and I looked at Medicine Hat in detail. I looked at London, Ontario, and my findings from those suggest this. The review of selected other communities points to workable solutions to address homelessness. That's kind of the good news. Like, there are people out there doing it, and they're doing it well, and they're getting it right. While learning from others, however, to point the way, the differences of culture, politics, and resources must also be considered. Nevertheless, in the case of the aforementioned example communities, there are some common elements of success that can be applied to Nanaimo. For instance, the 2007-8 work of Nanaimo's Working Group on Homelessness is vindicated by the overwhelming success of the Housing First approach to homelessness that is demonstrated in Basel, in Finland, and Medicine Hat. It is worth, in my view, exploring in detail here. What are some of the Canadian attitudes? We look let's find our way forward now. So what are some of the Canadian attitudes about homelessness that might inform that discussion? Well, in 2020, a poll was undertaken, quote, "It confirms a strong majority of Canadians across the country and across the political spectrum support urgent action and on homelessness and investments in affordable housing as part of the pandemic recovery," end of quote. So let's look at Housing First in more detail. So Housing First has become a very successful approach to addressing chronic homelessness. York University's Canadian Observatory on Homelessness and the Homeless Hub identify a number of core Housing First principles. And I'm just going to highlight these. I'm not going to get into detail because the document's there. 1, immediate access to permanent housing with no housing readiness requirements. This is all about Housing First. 2, consumer choice and self-determination. 3, recovery orientation. 4, individualized and client-driven supports. 5, social and community integration. Another study in 2014, entitled National at Home, a substantive study here in the country, identified Housing First as an important tool to help address homelessness. It provided 7 key findings. First, Housing First can be effectively implemented in Canadian cities of different size and different ethno-racial and cultural composition. 2, Housing First rapidly ends homelessness. 3, Housing First is a sound investment. 4, it is Housing First, it is not just housing. I can't emphasize that enough. It's Housing First, but it's not just housing. Having a place to live with supports can lead to other positive outcomes above and beyond those provided by existing services. Number 6, there are many ways in which Housing First can change lives. And 7, getting Housing First right is essential to optimizing outcomes. Interestingly, the Government of Canada is supportive of Housing First. It notes that, quote, "The Housing First approach is supported as a proven approach to tackling homelessness, including chronic homelessness, which remains an important priority," end of quote. I think be mindful of that when seeking funding from the feds, because they're actually looking for cities to come with Housing First solutions. They're looking for it. No one's coming. It's crazy. Housing First is cost effective, absolutely. Here's a quote. Another one talks about that. Housing First has been shown to be more cost-effective than traditional rapid rehousing efforts. According to research from the National Alliance to End Homelessness, the average cost savings of a Housing First program can range from $23,000 to more than $31,000 per program participant. End of quote. The 4 pillars approach. That's really key to it. So you've got typical Housing First, and for those who are addiction issues, 4 pillars, and they come together and it works. They've just nailed it. It nailed it in Switzerland and Finland with this approach, in Spain as well, and Norway, and Sweden. Anyway, 4 pillars. And again, the details here, I'll just go through what they're known as: harm reduction, therapy or treatment, prevention, and law enforcement. So, some findings from that work. Housing First has been an important and proven approach across many jurisdictions. It has been studied and documented by many researchers as a proven tool. Likewise, the use of harm reduction, prevention, treatment, and law enforcement have been essential backstops for the successful application of Housing First. Housing First, in the absence of those, doesn't work. Simply, Housing First requires appropriate wraparound supports in order for it to be successful. The 2 go hand in hand. Supporting and funding a homeless action plan for Nanaimo. Well, obviously you can't do it on the revenues you generate. It just doesn't work. You haven't been equipped to deal with these issues. You can deal with a bit, but you can't deal with it all. So provincial government, I talk about, I'm not going to review them now, but I identify provincial government role in funding, the federal government role in funding, and there's pages there with these new funding requirements, and I understand that they're looking for communities to come and access them, and there's money sitting there, but maybe I'm wrong. That's what I've been told. So we also need private sector, society, and NGO involvement as well. This is a collective initiative if we're going to get it right. So findings from that. The two senior levels of government have committed significant funds to address affordability and through that homeless housing. But there seems to be a disconnect between funding allocation and demonstrated need. Therefore, access to those funds will require considerable collaborative and coordinated effort on the part of the SBO here in the city and the city. Given that Nanaimo shares a higher proportion of both overall homeless people and drug use, it is incumbent on senior levels of government to facilitate addressing Nanaimo's plight. Not alone, you shouldn't be alone in this one. So next steps. The previous Nanaimo studies documented earlier that they were all, and they, some really good work. And they were all built on working collaboratively with service providers and government agencies. Many intended to address affordability and homelessness. But at the end of 2023, the results are in. Nanaimo faces an increasing affordability and homeless crisis. Nanaimo's homeless population has increased dramatically, with numbers likely approaching 1,000 now. Nanaimo is not able to provide enough shelter beds to get people off the streets during cold winter nights. In addition, unlike Medicine Hat, which has detailed real homeless counts because they use housing first, Nanaimo continues to only estimate homeless numbers because so many are on the streets, resulting in the system being overwhelmed. This paper is a plea to recognize that Nanaimo's once thriving downtown will not return to its pre-pandemic energy until and unless the city addresses affordability and homelessness in a more fulsome way, with the city of Nanaimo leading discussions with senior levels of government and setting out to become a leader in British Columbia in addressing affordability and homelessness. So then I put together a table 2, potential type of housing response to homeless need, if you saw that. So number of homeless in the one column, the type of homelessness that they demonstrate, and the type of housing provided that I think would support their particular needs, and use that to go to the next table, which is, I guess one would say a fairly bold one. Table 3, potential housing response to homelessness. And in that type of housing identified, design type identified, number of units up until 2032, total units 25 to 30, Class C cost estimates not including land, annual support costs, and then potential source of funds. So that was my stab at it. $65 million is the number, obviously terrifyingly high, but hang on to your seats because I think there's a way out. But anyway, it's easy for me to say, you could say, but I've been around the block. I hope I've demonstrated that early on at the start of this discussion. Table 4, a reinvestment of current housing costs. And so if we take basically that 21 million, and as we build housing to accommodate specific people, then the costs are going to drop because the numbers on the street will drop, and that's been proven in other places. Then that money saved can be used to pay for the housing that's actually built, in my view. And that's the way to look at it. You look at it as a financial model. Paying for it all. And that just came to me. I was working and went, whoa. I was talking to my architect friends, and we had a conversation, and we meet once a month, and we're talking about that. And he said, yeah, if you do that, and you're like, well, yeah, right. So anyway, that's where the table comes from. So paying for it all. The preceding numbers are nothing less than intimidating, especially for a municipality of 104,000 with revenues of 226 million. A continued growth in Nanaimo's homeless population will seriously further tax the financial service and human resources of the city. Without intervention, the cost of service and support to support the homeless population could reach upwards of 25 million in my view, by 2028. As noted in Table 4, investments in housing will lead to a significant decrease in public dollars spent on servicing and supporting those who are homeless. Over 7 years of strategic investment in non-market housing, there exists a potential to recoup $19 million. After 2029-30, the savings could be upwards of $19 million per year, or a total of $171 million by 2032. This suggests the investment of $65 million in 900 housing units required by 2930 could be fully recovered, including land costs. Further, so as the homeless population is housed and those at risk of being homeless decreases because of the implementation of a robust and fulsome Housing First program, the demand for housing units that do not generate a rental income, i.e. the shelters, emergency shelters, and supportive transition housing, will drop significantly because the overall homeless population and those in need will also drop significantly. As other cities that have implemented Housing First have shown, there is a high rate of return to society for those formerly homeless. For instance, Medicine Hat ran numbers from 2009 to 2022, where they found that 84% ended up being housed permanently. And then many of those were back in the community, working and supporting and being living part of the community. It was actually interesting, last year, 94% was what they found for that 1 year, but on average, it's 84%. And that's I know that that's true in the European countries. Further, there will be a reduction of private sector costs as homelessness becomes a manageable and less disruptive element in our city. Because when you walk around European cities, you don't see security people in stores or people here, there, and fences up and all that sort of thing. So, some recommendations then. Defining principles to address homelessness in Nanaimo. I've tried to capture that in 8 of these. Recognize that the majority of homeless people are homeless not by choice, but by circumstance, first of all. Secondly, acknowledge that the majority of homeless people desire to be housed. 3, recognize that the majority of homeless people in Nanaimo are actually Nanaimo residents. 4, provide a range of unconditional housing for homeless people. 5, provide a range of supports that address the diversity of homeless needs. 6, commit to minimizing people at risk of being homeless. 7, acknowledge that homelessness is a long-term challenge that requires long-term solutions, and use the systems planning organization as the key delivery tool to address homelessness. So I've made 19 recommendations. That's a lot of recommendations, but bear with me. 8 of them are strategic, and the rest are operational. Here's the strategic ones. What I did is, if you remember, I went through and made the recommendation, made a statement about it, justify the recommendation, and then had what I called the why and how, and I'm not going to read any of that. That's there if you want to read it. Recommendation 1, recognize that homelessness in Nanaimo is an existential crisis that must be addressed with fulsome response. Secondly, formally endorse the concept that homelessness violates the principle of human dignity. 3, adopt Housing First as the foundational element of a homeless strategy. 4, create a purpose-driven Housing First priority. 5, develop a robust plan to minimize at-risk of homeless people. 6, prioritize addressing the 20% of homeless who suffer from acute health issues. 7, implement a continuum of housing and wraparound supports. 8, provide a comprehensive, coordinated, intensive, and integrated services and supports. And the operational recommendations, there's 11 of those, and they continue to run along. So recommendation 9, continue to support the work and independence of the systems planning organization. Recommendation 10, put in place supports to significantly reduce at-risk households from becoming homeless. 11, address substance abuse through a client-centered model using the 4-pillar methodology. 12, develop a decolonization and indigenization of the system of care. 13, develop a robust government agenda that ensures a coordinated approach with needs, land, and approvals in alignment. 14, clearly define the role of staff in creating a trust environment. 15, require and foster a collaborative approach. 16, provide a range of services that address the breadth of need. 17, ensure that there's stable funding and monitor delivery. 18, adopt and implement the homeless management information systems. And lastly, 19, which is a bit of a funny one you might think, but it's part of my background, right? Explore the potential to establish a modular housing initiative to serve Vancouver Island, because we could actually get some real wins out of that, because we could supply the island to do housing required. So, in conclusion, homelessness in Nanaimo and across Canada is an existential crisis that deserves an equivalent response to ensure that the current crisis does not continue to detrimentally affect the well-being of those who are homeless, and as well, those affected by homelessness, just like us here today. There are known solutions and methods to address homelessness, most aspects of homelessness, such as Housing First and associated wraparound supports and services. Those solutions are costly, yeah. They take time, absolutely. They also require considerable political and community will. While the task is formidable and costly, the return on investment has proven to be significant. On return on investment, I don't mean just the financial stuff, right? But even that side proves itself out when it's documented as it is in Europe. The alternative is unacceptable. Action is necessary, compassionate, focused action. Action that may require tough decisions. Mechanisms do exist. Nanaimo Systems Planning Organization was recently constituted to address homelessness. It is a time for it to be asked to implement a fulsome Housing First agenda with wraparound supports. Time is of the essence. Federal and provincial governments must be approached in the near term for their support to implement a robust action plan to address Nanaimo's homeless crisis. Much needs to be done, much is at stake. Without concerted action, the homeless crisis will only get worse. So just a few last words. The best time to have started to do the right thing was yesterday. But the second best time is today. And I want to end, because it shows 5 minutes here. Do I have, I know I was, am I good? I got one small quote I'd like to read you, if I may. This is from Out in the Cold, spending the coldest night of the year with Courtney's Homeless, and Oliver Loren, really good. He stayed up all night with these people. Comox Valley Record, January 16th. A quote, warming inside the Tim Hortons with a coffee in hand, offered by a bystander, Mark, described the many challenges he faces on the street daily. From quarreling with bylaw officers to constantly moving around, the man shared the same sentiment as many others. And there's like 3 pages, it's a wonderful documentation of this. He's going out with these people and staying there all night and through the next night. And here's what this Mark had to say, a homeless person, quote, housing is the big thing. I can't establish anything. I've been wearing the same clothes now for over a week, and everything is wet from the weather. All my stuff started to mold. I'm losing my clothes all the time. I have nothing else than what I have. Being kicked out by bylaw does not give you time for your clothes to dry. I don't follow politics, but if you can make a difference, I'd say we need more. If they, I put you in there, if they can make a difference, I'd say we need more low-income housing. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Krogh?
Thank you very much, Chair. And going back to recommendation 9, Mr. Whitty, around continuing to support the work in Independent Systems Planning Organization, and your comments in your conclusion where you say it's time for it to be asked to implement a fulsome Housing First agenda with wraparound supports, etc. I'm just wondering if you can expand on that and what you think council or would propose that council should be doing in terms of either direction, advice, mandate, funding, all those things that relate to the SPO. I mean, as you know, that came out of the work of the Health and Housing Task Force, co-chaired by Councillors Hemmons and Bonner. And I think there's high hopes for that organization, but I think to some extent, and I don't mean it as a criticism, but I certainly raise it as a community concern, that we're maybe not entirely sure how it and what it should be doing, and I'm wondering if you could care to comment on that, because I know you've done some work with them, and I certainly value your opinion as I do the presentation today, which is much appreciated.
Thank you. I think they need to speak to that as much. I think that, and I've met, I had a nice coffee and chatted in the vault, and they're here today, one of the reps. So I do think that in the absence of Housing First, then you can have an SBO and 4,000 other organizations. You're not going to, in my view, humble view, but I've done lots of studies across this country. Well, okay, not across the country. From Lakehead to West Vancouver Island to the high Arctic. Lots of studies with all kinds of different requirements. And there are nubs of time when you know you found something that is really fundamental to success. Housing First is fundamental to success on this. If you do decide to adopt it, and it's a lot of work, you will, in 10 years, say, best decision we ever made. And I don't say those things lightly. And I advise lots of councils, city councils, small town councils, First Nations, governments, but I absolutely fundamentally believe that. So SBO, to be successful, needs to do that. And they may not agree that they want to do that, I don't know, but that's my view. But they certainly, Housing First works best when it's embedded in a structure like that. In the case of Basel, because Basel's Basel, they've set a structure within the city administration to do it. But then, you know, it's just a different way they govern there. Switzerland is so different than the way we describe democracy here. So, yeah, it's very different. And as they have referendums and all of that, and their financial situation is different, so they can do that. But here, like if you look at Medicine Hat, they did that. They set up a separate society, and that society was mandated to address this issue, and they are totally arm's length from council. They don't get any funding from the city. But they get provincial.
Follow up, Mayor Krog?
Thank you.
Councillor Manley?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your research and for your presentation. Just to clarify, when you're talking about Housing First, you're also talking about complex care for people with complex needs when you're talking about wraparound services, correct?
What's that?
When you're talking about Housing First,
Yep.
you're also talking about complex care for people with complex challenges.
Yeah.
Wraparound services.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Well, I would say the wraparounds aren't just even for the complex. I mean, the wraparounds are broad place, but the focus is on those with complex needs. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
it's a spectrum of needs.
Absolutely.
So, you know, some people that are unhoused in our community are just, you know, they've lost their housing because they're low-wage workers, or they're
Right.
seniors on fixed incomes.
Right.
They're quite capable of
Right.
having their own place
Absolutely.
and managing their lives.
So, and if I can jump in, I mean, Switzerland, when I describe what they do there, you can see just the range of things they do, and including, like, they own 2,000 housing units in the city, because they have what's called a foundation, which is the equivalent of, dare I say, a development corporation, but we're not going there. So, anyway, so they've used that as a tool to help them build housing, right? So they recognize that it's important to build housing, and while you've got me on that, I'm gonna, if I may, so, because I think that's another part of this tool. May I expand an answer to your question?
Sure.
May I
like
do that,
what I'm
Chair?
getting at is it's like a process of triaging people and
Right.
providing the kind of
Okay,
housing
yep.
that they need. But Housing First would include people that have serious complex challenges, right? It would be specific to those needs.
Right.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions, because you mentioned in passing about the federal government having Housing First funding, but communities aren't accessing that.
You know, you're sounding really muffled to me, and I don't know if it's.
It's this room.
Is it?
That's why I wear
Seriously,
this
I'm
ear.
really having trouble.
That's why I wear an earpiece, because half the time this echo, I can't hear what's going on in here. But you mentioned federal funding, and you said that there's Housing First funding that isn't being accessed.
Well, no, the feds have gone publicly and said we'd support Housing First, right? And I'm going, well, if I were a municipality and I read that, I'd be going, and no one's going to them to ask for money, and they've said publicly, we think Housing First is a great solution, we support it, then I'd be going there with a Housing First agenda, because that's a link in to get the conversation and potentially get money. I mean, that's how I used to advise clients, so.
Yeah, because they have a series of different housing kind of portfolios and programs, as does the provincial government.
No, they don't have a Housing First portfolio that I know specifically, but they publicly say in their documentation, Housing First is the answer in their view.
Yeah. Have you made presentations to the MLA or to ministers about this Housing First approach? And when it came to Medicine Hat, they took on this approach as a municipality. They got support from the provincial government to do Housing First, funding support.
3.6 million or something?
7. 7 million they received initially.
What's that?
7 million they received initially from the government in 2017.
Yeah, because it's not the kind of, we don't have the tax base to be able to do this on our own.
And may I, Chair? Yeah, you're absolutely right. No, and they get 3.6 yearly, plus the feds give them, started off at 500, now it's gone up to 800 or some thousand a year or something, yeah. But again, those numbers change, but there seemed to be a winner, so senior governments are investing in them because there seemed to be a winner, right? And they took 1,900 people off the street, right?
Councillor Manley?
So what you're really proposing is more of a declaration of this is the mode of operation that we should be doing in the city, and then seeking the support of the senior levels of government to make that happen.
Right, absolutely.
All right.
Well, may I say, in my view, it's not going to happen unless they step up, and I can't imagine they're not going to step up if, in fact, the case is made, because they're desperate for solutions. They're desperate for cities to have solutions. They want to point to winners. Elections are coming. They want to say, these guys are doing what needs to be done, and we're helping them do that.
What do you say to people who have the argument, if you build it, they will come, that we will attract homeless people from other communities to come to
Because
Nahat?
that's not what's happening elsewhere.
Okay.
Medicine Hat, they haven't experienced that. Basel hasn't experienced that.
And is Basel the Switzerland, like the Switzerland
So
model, is
Basel-
that a national model that Basel is doing?
Yeah,
or is that-
yeah, pretty well, yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks.
But Basel is, if Switzerland, this is the northern border, Basel's in this kind of little triangle. France is, you walk across the border there, Germany, you walk across the border there, so they get lots of this, and they're not coming in to make use of that.
Okay, thank you.
Director Hemmons, or Councillor Hemmons?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Dr. Woody, for coming here today and sharing your research with us. To the Housing First piece, I just want to say that was forefront at the Health and Housing Task Force, and I believe it was embedded in all of our previous action plan to end homelessness. I think Housing First as a concept is something that the
Right.
state has supported for a very long time.
But may I jump in with respect? It's one thing to call it Housing First, it's another to actually do Housing First. And if I may be so bold to say, I've done enough research on this to know what's Housing First and what isn't. I've lived the Basel experience. I've talked to as you know, if you've read the report, I've talked to the city, I've talked to those that have researched it, and it's very different. It is, as I said, Housing First, wraparound supports. And Housing First, not just providing housing, that's not enough. It's about all the supports that are necessary. It's about the different types of housing necessary. It's about the different types of opportunities. It's full-on different.
Dr. Woody, I think we completely agree on this. I just want to share that Housing First is a philosophy and a concept that the city
thank you.
entertains.
Sorry.
I think the problem is that it's predicated on having existing stock that we can move people into, which is where we fail every time.
Right.
We don't have anywhere for people to go, so we have no effective Housing First model that we can apply to anything.
Right.
I do have a question regarding London, Ontario, page 27. You note that 300 people in that community are living in tents. And
Whereabouts?
The city, 27.
Yep.
So in your report, it says, instead of clearing tent dwellers out, the city has built portable toilets and washing station and given people resources to keep their shelters clean and safe. Now, we presumably have about 3 times as many homeless people. The recommendation of London, Ontario is that you don't congregate these folks in any more than 6 tents,
Right.
which is kind of what happened in Duncan, and they had a much smaller population. So my question for you is, as we're working on Housing First and as we're working on getting those amenities built so we can get that process rolling, is this a concept you would support of managed encampments?
I'm not trying to waffle, but I don't have that knowledge and expertise. I mean, what I do know is that what I said in the end in London's, if I may read it, may I read that last paragraph? You said, London's approach is focused on making life for street people less stressful, healthier, and more acceptable, but its housing targets seem to be less than needed, and its acceptance of tent living troubling. Those are my words.
Okay.
So I think, you do what you do in the short term, but it can't be a long-term solution. Maybe that's the way I would answer your question.
Thank you.
Councillor Eastmere?
Thank you. Through you, I think Councillor Hemmons actually asked the question about London that I was going to ask about those sort of managed encampments. I really appreciate the recommendations. I know that personally I wish we had control over all of these things that would make the wraparound supports possible, and I just see how broken for example, our healthcare system is, and like how difficult it is for the average person who is already housed to access any type of like healthcare or like mental health care. So I just see so many pieces of this are the city needing to work and to get support from the province and the federal government, which we're kind of constantly feeling like we're not getting what we need from them. And they want to tell you that they support Housing First, but we haven't seen any evidence that that's actually an approach that they're really taking. So I am heartened to see the city doing what it's doing and saying yes to all the things that we can when it comes to working with BC Housing in the province. And I really see the desire around this council table to make the Housing First model work, but I just feel like so many of the pieces are not within our control, and we do need to take like a regional approach to it, because like just the city tackling this issue, as Councillor Manley brought up, then there's the concern that it may draw other people who have needs. And we saw even with the warming center, like the city had to step up with city money to open a warming center, which we wouldn't need if BC Housing was doing the job of making an adequate number of shelter beds available, let alone housing. But we can't even get the overnight shelter beds that we need. And then so we had to step up to do the warming centers, and then in order to open them overnight when there's suddenly emergency funding from the province, we don't have the trauma-informed staff to bring on at the last minute to do it. So that piece alone is so difficult. I mean, we saw Nanaimo step up and open 3, whereas Parksville and Oceanside, there was nothing until, luckily some churches came together and opened something up. But it is frustrating to see just this piecemeal approach everywhere, and the city scrabbling to do what it can, but we need every city to take this approach, and then more seriously for the province and federal government to actually enable the kind of supports that would be needed to make Housing First really, really work. So I really appreciate this paper, and I do think that you should be presenting to the province and to the federal government instead, or in addition to us, because they're really the ones who hold the purse strings for us to be able to take on some of this work, which I think will be life-changing, and it is for every single person you provide housing to.
I'm going to be, and please, I appreciate those comments. I would say that in the absence of addressing this issue, and I talk about this in the paper, we're going to end up losing firefighters, our medical people, because they're dealing with on the street, and I talk about it in here, they're dealing with the deaths. They're going to be overburdened, overworked, and the systems are going to fail. This thing is just an existential crisis that if it is not addressed, we will be facing, and I'm not an alarmist, people who know me, I'm not, but this one, so I would say this, that if I have to go to the provincial government and speak about this, or the federal government, this isn't happening. This needs the city of Nanaimo and other sister cities to go and raise Cain. And I'd be pleased to help however you want, pleased to provide advice. Listen, if you can, I have First Nation clients who were flooded out by Ontario Hydro, Northern Manitoba flooded out, just unbelievable how they were treated. And you know what? We were successful in the end. You never could change those detrimental impacts, but they got a control of that agenda. And I helped them do that. I'm convinced it can be done, but it just takes a commitment to do that. So there. Anyway, thank you.
Councillor Thorpe?
Yeah, don't go away yet, Dr. Woody. Thank you very much, first of all, through you, Chair. Really appreciate the time and effort you've put into this report and sharing it with us today. And I certainly would not disagree with most of the content
Thank you.
of what you've said. But I have to tell you, I was drawn to the section on page 33 under 6.4, the 4-pillar approach.
Okay.
And I think this builds on Councillor Eastmuir's comments regarding what Nanaimo can do and where other levels of government need to come into play. And I see that, in my opinion, there needs to be much better alignment in philosophy between the city and that of the province and the feds. So I note on the page I referenced, page 33, quote, "To be successful, Housing First needs to be aligned with a successful drug program, such as Switzerland's four-pillar approach, which they developed in the 1990s. Now, recognizing that homelessness is a very broad label and that there are people on the street who are there simply because of economic conditions and affordability issues, what I call the working poor.
May I just, actually, the majority are in that. The minority are there because they came with a drug issue. They ended up with a drug issue because if you read some of the quotes in here, they had no choice at night, freezing.
Right.
Right?
But I would also argue that a large percentage of those on the street do now have mental health or addiction problems.
Absolutely.
So when I look at the four-pillar approach that Switzerland developed in the 1990s and their national philosophy, apparently, and now I look at British Columbia, Canada in the 2020s and our philosophy, the four pillars are harm reduction. Well, I think many people are supporting safe supply. Therapy or treatment. I frankly, and I'm being critical of our senior levels of government, I have not observed that to be a priority for our government. Prevention, reducing drug consumption, making it harder for people to start using drugs. Well, I think we're making it easier these days. And the last one is law enforcement, which really leaped out at me. Regulatory measures to implement the prohibition of illegal drugs. My goodness, we're doing exactly the opposite. We're taking away any legal impediment to drug taking. So when our provincial or federal philosophy really flies in the face of three of those four of Switzerland's pillars, how effective can our Housing First philosophy be in the city of Nanaimo? And I'm not criticizing, I'm not arguing with you, but I just have real concerns that in many ways we're not following those four pillars, and therefore our efforts may be well in jeopardy.
Right. No, and you know, great observations. Thank you. Great observations. And the law enforcement here is because there's legal drug use in Switzerland, but you don't see it it's not done publicly, right? You go to safe sites. That's how you get your drugs. And what they do is they absolutely hammer those who are out in the street trying to sell it. Like, they just throw them in jail. I mean, they just, and that's the kind of law enforcement. So, you know, people now, oh, can we do that? Well, there they do, and it works. But they treat those with substance abuse kindly and gently, give them the supports. They're safe sites, but they don't do it out on the street. And if there's any drug dealing out on the street where dealers are selling, those guys, well, they're gone, they're in jail. They're on top of them right away. But what I would say this, though, I mean, this is the challenge. Somebody has to start this. And what happened if I can digress to Zurich in 1990, that's where the four-pillar thing started. So they had 3,000 people in the Central Park using heroin. And it was just unbelievable. And it was a standing joke in the world. They called it Needle Center and blah, blah, blah. They say we have to do something. And that's where they decided to try this four-pillar. And within 10 years, the whole thing was under control, and it worked. But they were in an absolute crisis. And I said this earlier. I don't want to, I'm just not that kind of person to use these scare tactics. But my view is that if we don't do something, we're going to be at 2,500 for sure in 2028. We will be. I mean, that's at 20% a year. It's right now going up 30% a year. We've got 1,000. We thought we were at 600. Now we're at 1,000. It's going to go to 2,500. It'll go to 3,000, 5,000. Who knows? Like, this is it's crazy, right? So I mean, there's going to be a plateau. But what's that plateau number? So either we deal with it now, and we convince the senior levels of government. They say they have these pots of money, and they can't seem to spend the pots of money because they're not getting proposals. Then is it not an opportunity for a city just as Medicine Hat did in 2008, little old Medicine Hat, for gosh sakes. They've taken 1,900 people that would have been on the street, off the street. I talked to them 3 weeks ago. They had 12 homeless on the street, 12. Now, I don't know what they got today. I could phone up and find out, but anyway, I didn't. But anyway, 12. That was 2 weeks before Christmas. So 12 people in a community of 63,000. Wow. So housing first. It works there, and it works in Basel, and it works in Finland, it works in Sweden, and it works in Norway. Anyway, it works when it's applied, but it does need, you're absolutely right, Councillor Thorpe, absolutely right. Without those other levels of government, there's no way that it can be addressed. But this is a national crisis, and in here I talk about that number, 235,000 people, minimum. There was a projection that said that's probably should be doubled. Probably is 500,000 in the country. If you're a federal government, then election's coming, and you got an opposition that figures this out. They haven't talked about this yet. Can you imagine the reaction in the country? 500,000 people homeless in Canada? Are you kidding me? And same with the provincial government. I think it's hardball time. It's hardball time. And if we don't play hardball, it's going to be worse.
Thank you once again. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councillor Perino?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Thank you. It was an excellent report and a very interesting read. There are some, I'm going to just say, I've only been at this particular council table for a year. And I certainly came in thinking, they haven't done this, they haven't done that, they haven't done this, they haven't done that, and the list went on and on for me. Now that I've sat here for a year, I can tell you they've done a great deal. Mm-hmm. And the staff have worked very hard. I mean, we spent a good portion of this morning trying to deal with this particular issue. But what you don't know is, number one, there is not nearly enough funding, not from our citizens, not from the provincial government, not from the federal government. And our staff have tried very hard to get every single grant we could. And I'm impressed with how many grants we get, but we don't get enough. We can't get the police officers that we need because there aren't enough coming through the system. We can't get the number of staff from our healthcare system to help with this problem. You can build it, but if you don't have anybody to staff it, you can hardly get it there. We struggle with, when you talk about the harm reduction where we're actually handing out drugs, and then you see drug dealers, and I've seen it where they go in and, anyway, the situation is so intense. And we can't do it alone, and I am amazed by what we're doing, but we are putting our businesses in jeopardy. We're putting our neighborhoods in jeopardy. We are doing everything we can to try and get more housing, but I'm telling you, it is not this easy. If it were this easy, it would have been done a long time ago. It is unbelievably tough, and you go and ask any neighborhood whether or not they want to have this particular type of housing in their neighborhood. And understandably, they're upset. Go and ask any business. Do you want that kind of housing in your neighborhood where your business is and you're trying to make a buck to feed your family? This is really, really tough. And I guess the only part that I struggle with is that when I hear you talk, it's like we're not doing anything. And I can tell you, just being here for the past year, I'm amazed by what we've been trying to do, by how much success we've had and by how little success we've had, because it's just always bigger. And I get it. We have already lost people, since January 1st with this cold weather. These problems are insurmountable, but this is much harder than you think, and we're not getting the support that we need from neither our provincial or our federal to help us to get through. They don't say to us, let's give you money and you decide where to build and we'll help you to get those buildings there. None of that. It's, here's the money, and you're going to build where we tell you to build. I wish you could see how tough it was. It's much, much worse than what I think 99% of this community has any idea of.
May I, Chair?
Yes.
So I appreciate your comments and your
sorry.
frustration, but if you recall how I started this, I complimented the work that you've done.
Oh, it's not enough.
I did compliment.
I get it.
I know your staff. You've got great staff. You're doing
amazing.
Here's the problem. The system is broken. It is an existential crisis. And we can sit back and
Well, we're not sitting,
No,
no one's sitting
no, no.
back, I can tell you that.
No, but in terms of, okay, that's inappropriate word, but we can choose not to do something different, which I'm advocating, and see what transpires. But I can tell you what's going to transpire, and I think most people can. This is unlike anything we've ever had to deal with. And it requires solutions like anything like that we've never had to identify and deal with. And I know that BC housing is not particularly easy to deal with. I hear that from lots of people. I hope they're listening because they're failing, and they're failing themselves and they're failing us. And they do one-offs. Those are great one-offs. This isn't about one-offs. One-offs just don't work anymore on this one. This is about absolutely federal, now, and this is where I guess the Achilles heel of this one is, it requires the federal government, the provincial government, and local government to work together. And you want to work with them, and they don't seem to be stepping up. And then I think then there needs to be accountability. But if no one talks about it, then it never gets addressed. And so I'm talking about it, and I'm frustrated.
Well, I can tell you, we went to the UBCM and we spent a good portion of our time talking to them about this issue, and
Yeah.
it's been a tough go. Anyway, thank you for doing this, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Whitty.
Thank you.
So moving
Carol?
on, next we have, oh, sorry, Councillor Gasselbruck, he's just left.
Sure, I just want to make a quick comment. Dave, thanks so much for taking the time to put that report together. When we look at just the number of homelessness and sort of what is currently being done, I agree that there's just a lack of the scale of effort that is needed and the resources needed to take a bite in it. And it's interesting to see that, it hasn't gotten to the level of dialogue at, federal and provincial election cycles that you'd expect given the scale of the issue. And, it's something to reflect on as a city is, are we communicating the scale of the crisis effectively and what we expect for the level of response from the provincial and federal government? A lot of work has been done by us, and I think we need to continually reflect on is our advocacy at the scale and effort that is screaming at us, and why haven't we seen a greater mobilization at higher levels of government yet? So thank you again for your work and for the reflection. Thanks.
Thank you.
We have Mayor Krogh again.
Thank you very much, and I don't know whether Councillor Gesselbrock is channeling this from where he is in the distant lands, but I put myself on the list and I'm going to echo his comments. And I think what I took away from Dr. Whitty's presentation today, amongst many things, I think the most important thing is that having a provincial government advocate for the solution to this problem when they control most of the purse strings is not something we can really expect. The federal government has not a great interest in taking this on as it's seen as a responsibility, and if there's ever an issue in society that is seen as local and for which local politicians are not necessarily held responsible but are certainly hear the most about it, this is it. And what I take away from Dr. Whitty today is we have to be the hardball advocates, because for a number of reasons, some of which I've just mentioned, we're not going to get the kind of advocacy to put this at the top of the political agenda. And Councillor Gesselbrock has said today what I have said over and over again. It is astonishing to me that this doesn't seem to resonate at election time. It certainly didn't resonate in the last federal election. It didn't resonate in the last provincial election. And yet I don't think my political antennae are so ancient or out of touch or ineffective that I am mishearing, if you will, or failing to understand what the public talks about, and this is the topic of constant conversation. I'm tempted to use foul language, but my grade 6 principal told me that that's something you shouldn't do in a public place when you're given public office, so I will resist. But it is astonishing to me that you have to have, you know, Dr. Woody come down here, so to speak, out of, well, what's really not much of a retirement, has it been, and advocate, and for us to continue to have to do this. And so I appreciate the enthusiasm for the advocacy, and you know, I think in fairness, as he has pointed out, we have done a lot of advocacy and we are making some progress. But maybe it's up to the Union of BC Municipalities, maybe it's up to every municipal politician in this province as we approach provincial election to make this the issue as we see it. Councillor Thorpe asked earlier what's the Urban Mayors Caucus had to say, if anything, and I think we've taken the position, we have 4 issues, and mental health and addictions is at the top of the list of 4. We've already made our position clear. I think it has to be made clear by everybody, because clearly nobody else is going to do it effectively based on the previous experience that I've mentioned, which is the seeming inability of politicians or anybody to make this the issue that we understand it to be. If there's anyone around this table who tells me this isn't the biggest topic of conversation in town when they're approached by people, please tell me now, and I'll perhaps reconfigure my understanding of what I keep hearing. But I am, and as I've said before, tired, almost sick to death of hearing about this and the frustration level that is felt by us, which I think just reflects the views of our citizens. So I want to thank you, and I don't know whether I've inspired Councillor Gesselbrock to say something more, because I've been saying nice things about his advocacy. No, but much appreciated today. Thank you.
I appreciate you letting me be forthright, and I will say this: if you want to pick my brain and whatever, it's pro bono, right? That's what I do now, and I'm offering my services, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Whitty. Okay, moving on now to number 7, reports, roadway asphalt asset management, to be introduced by Mr. Sims. No. We have people that gotta leave. So we'll get this one, won't take long.
Thanks, Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think this is a little bit of a switch in the topic, and hopefully I'm disappointed to see many of my planning colleagues have left. Anyhow, so the Federation of Canadian Municipalities funded the work to undertake this sort of customer service level of service approach, and for our asphalt. So one of the very costly pieces of infrastructure that we operate and maintain and own. So a level of service is the degree to which we provide each service, and as Council is well aware, we provide a whole gamut of services. So this particular one we're talking about is blacktop. And as in the report, there's kind of there's 2 levels of service. One of them is the technical side of things, which is what we do really well. We measure, we weigh and all that sort of stuff. It's kind of a standards-based or science-based approach. And then there's the customer service level. And so that's how does a customer receive, perceive, and feel about the level of service. Is it too much? Is it not enough? Do they want more? All of that sort of thing. So interesting, you'd think, how can you do this for something as boring as asphalt? Get it, and from a customer point of view, from our citizens' point of view, that's what this study's about, and Mr. Thompson's got an interesting presentation, at least in our world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, councillors, Mayor, Madam Chair. I won't repeat what Mr. Sims has said, but I will start by pointing out a typo on page 3 of the report. The paragraph following the table, the 3rd sentence, it reads, in 10 years, 90% of the city's roadways will fail to meet the minimum PQI established. That should be 9.0%. So it's the small things. In 2020, as Mr. Sims said, we received an FCM grant opportunity to undertake work to assess the customer level of service for our roadway asphalt system. We engaged a consultant, undertook a series of focus groups in 2022 to investigate and get feedback on those customer level of service questions. Kinds of things we were trying to get out of those focus groups were, what is the feeling about our existing roadway system? What challenges do they have? Are they satisfied? Are they unsatisfied? And what became very clear out of that was that that focus group opportunity gave us a really good, assured us that the people we were talking to had a good understanding of asset management principles as a grounding in this conversation. It was very obvious that the feedback we got was that our roads are currently in fair to good shape, and we used a lot of pictures to demonstrate what we were talking about when we talk about a fair road, failing road, or an excellent road. And those focus groups recognize that busier roads degrade faster than local roads, and they did not want to see conditions deteriorate from where they were. And at the end of the conversation, the question always comes down to money. If you want something, you need to pay for it. There was a small willingness to pay to maintain or see minor improvements in the road conditions, but it was definitely, they did not want to see them deteriorate. So attachment B to the report lays out the technical side of the work that we did. We did that in 2022. And what it does is it lays out those willingness to pay scenarios with forecast road conditions and associated maintenance plans. So for the FCM grant, the deliverables were to complete the customer level of service work and then to translate that into maintenance plans for council's consideration and decision. Our modeling, the technical modeling, suggests that funding of $13.6 million a year is required to maintain our asphalt in the existing conditions. However, I feel that would be irresponsible to even suggest that figure. So we went back and looked at the number that the focus groups had tabled, and they had suggested a value of something in the order of $40 per property would be the top end of their willingness to pay. So we used that as a modeling for our technical conditions. And that works out to about $1.5 million a year for roadway asphalt maintenance. And with that level of funding, at 5 years, we would see our pavement quality index for the city as a whole decrease from its current situation of 78 to 75. So it's a minor reduction, but we've proven over the last 10 years to be very strategic in our investments. So one of the things to point out is this value does not address or does not include funding from the capital side of things. There is right now about $13 million in our 5-year capital plan for roadway maintenance. The vast majority of that is concurrent funding with other utility projects, water, storm, sewer, et cetera. And we know that those get moved around quite a lot. So we've sort of ignored the benefit of those for the time being, but we do see the benefit of those showing up in our studies. So in summary, there is a willingness on the customer side to pay to make sure that asphalt conditions don't degrade substantially. The technical work shows that we've been very strategic in our investments to this point, but it also shows that those conditions are going to continue to deteriorate as the roadway system ages. And so increasing the investment at this time is important to ensure that we're maintaining that customer level of service. And we have presented a number of options for council's deliberation, starting at the maximum level of $1.5 million, and then providing a number of options below that at a decreasing rate, recognizing that obviously there are competing interests and demands on the public purse. So With that, I'm open to questions.
Seeing no questions. And
Make it quick.
you have to push because you're not showing up. Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Chair, I appreciate that. I just want to get us to where we, and I think this is what you're suggesting, I just want to get us to where we are doing some maintenance every single year on our roads. So the worst are being taken care of every single year. That's where I'd like to see us get. So we always have a plan of what we're going to tackle every single, and that's what I'm seeing so far. So the hope is that, for me anyway, that you continue on with that. I'm actually very impressed with the roads, with how they are.
That's absolutely what we do. We have a plan, and then every year we recalibrate that plan in the spring based on winter conditions. Last year, 2022-23 was particularly bad for potholes, so we had to readjust our plan. But we also look at opportunities to piggyback onto utilities projects, onto development projects, and see if we can eke out some additional benefit from the money that the private sector or is coming from other investment opportunities.
Are you going to talk to us also about the issues around asphalt and how, whether or not we're going to continue using the product that we're using it, or are we? Is it just going to? Is this it for today, or I just wonder because I have a question about that.
Based on today's technology, asphalt is very robust. In our last engineering standards review, we increase the thickness required for asphalt roadways. We're seeing lifespans anywhere, depending on use, 30 to 50 years. So from that perspective, it's a very economical solution. It's easy to repair when necessary, and it's cost effective to build well in the first place.
So I was told by a senior that it's very shiny. Of course, obviously when it's wet, it's more so apparently shiny than other areas. Not sure if that's true, but in the rain, it's difficult to drive, particularly at night.
Certainly new asphalt can be quite shiny when it gets wet. It's got a very smooth surface, but after a couple of years of wear, being exposed to the environment, traffic moving over it, that smooth surface wears off a little bit and it becomes much more textured.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Geselbrecht.
Thanks. Thanks for the presentation. Through the chair, so have we set an average standard PQI for each of the different types of roads that we're trying to maintain? I couldn't discern that.
To Councillor Geselbrecht, through the chair, we have a citywide average of 79 that we've set as a target. One of the things that came out of the latest technical study and the levels of service work was to review and set targets for different road classifications. So our arterials would have a higher classification than our collectors, which would have a higher classification or a higher target than our local roads. So that'll be work that we'll be undertaking this year.
Okay, great. Yeah, and the we're at like 78 PQI at the moment, average, or for 2022. And I was just looking at the minimum. So like the minimum for a mobility arterial is 50.
Through the chair, yes, those are the minimums that we've set in our modeling. But in order to achieve the average target score, we would very rarely see a road actually get to that condition just because of the impact it would have on the average.
Absolutely. I guess my orientation is that, I think we've been doing an incredible job on our roads compared to most places probably in North America. We've got very nice roads. There's some parts of town, some of the local roads, seem a little bit more degraded. But I personally would like to see, maintaining highest possible standard on the the mobility arterial, urban arterial roads and some of the collectors, but I'm okay with reducing our average score a little bit, by letting some of the other ones not paying them as much. And in terms of a decision on council on this today, I would be more inclined, one, not put any money into it, or put the option 3. Thank you.
Director Hemmons, or Councillor Hemmons? You keep going off. Can you try again? No, because you weren't on.
Okay, thank you.
I was looking.
Thank you for this information. So if I understand correctly, we did focus group testing and we determined through that process that residents don't want to see any deterioration to the roads. The proposed recommendations that you bring forward all include deterioration because we don't think it's viable to say in order to not deteriorate at all, the cost of it is just incredible. So each of our recommendations have deteriorating roads as part of the package. Okay. Chair, I'm going to move option 2, please.
Is there a seconder to option 2? Seconded by Councillor Eastmere. Would you like to comment further? No, sorry, to Councillor Hemmons first.
Thanks, Chair. I think this is something that we could spend more and more and more and better money on all the time because this is our infrastructure. I agree that we have good roads. I don't want to not put anything in because that's exactly what we hear from the folks that we asked. That's what they don't want. I was inclined to move option number 1 actually and then debate it through the budgeting process, which I'm still open to, but I just thought hearing from Councillor Geselbrock, kind of getting a sense of the room, that the middle of the road option is probably amenable.
Thank you. Councillor Eastmere?
Thank you. Through you, I just wanted to follow up on that question. And it says that these investment levels would fall short of the full funding required. How much short? What's the actual full funding required?
Through the chair, that value would be about $13.6 million each year based on the modeling that we've set out for that average pavement quality index across the entire city.
$13.6 million per year?
Yes.
Okay.
Any further questions?
Total.
I just got a comment.
Is it working? It is now. No, you want the mic disabled. Sorry. Anything further, Councillor Eastmere? No, I have Mayor Krogh next. Mayor Krogh?
Thank you very much, Chair. And firstly, I want to express thanks upon my return from holiday to Mr. Sims and Mr. Thompson and others for weathering the storm and responding to a number of concerns that were raised, and give compliments to city staff generally for the very good job. That seems to be the general public opinion. And that isn't always the case, although generally when it's not the case, it's not because of what they've done, it's because of the unfairness of the weather gods. I was going to move option 1, candidly. There is nothing more basic to what we do than the provision of roads. I mean, the most primitive early forms of government, when we crawled out of the trees and caves, for heaven's sakes, was to ensure that there would be safe routes to go between one place to another, and roads strike me as the absolute basic. So for what it's worth, I'm going to vote against the motion on the floor simply because I would support option 1. It is staff's recommendation. There is public opinion polling, and I'm sure this will please the ears of Councillor Armstrong, our esteemed chair today. If what we are told about the weight of electric vehicles is any indication, our roads are going to face more punishing use. We are one of the 5 fastest growing regions in the country, and looking at the statistics around what people are transporting themselves with, it's vehicles. And as much as I would love to see a major shift, I don't think that's going to occur that quickly. So option 1 seems to me to be the logical choice, that maintaining our roads is a basic. And I'm certainly prepared to justify the political consequences of the budgetary increase. So that's my position, and I appreciate Councillor Hemmons left the door open that she was taking the middle ground, but as I say, I can't support the existing motion. For that reason, I went option 1. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe?
Or Councillor Gesselbrock?
No, he's taking his sign.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Chair.
Go for it.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, yes, I agree with the thoughts of Mayor Krog on this, and I would much prefer option number 1. This is about asset management, and I think if there's one thing that we've learned over the course of our term is the importance of taking care of our assets and maintaining them adequately. And I note that even, option 2 has been suggested. Investment level will fall short of the full funding required to maintain roadways in their current condition. That might well be the case even with option 1, but I think we need to put as much as we can into this important piece of infrastructure for our city. So I'm not going to support option 2. I'll be pleased to support option 1 if that is put on the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gisbrecht, I see your hand again.
Well, I was going to vote against option 2 because I think it's too much money. But now, given what I've heard the rest of the councillors are, this might be the best compromise. I guess, you know, looking at our road score of 77, and it might decrease down to 71. You know, I would much rather see the PQI developed for the different types of roads. Absolutely, for our main roads that are driven on a lot and people are going at higher speeds, we need to have them in tip-top condition, and we should be maintaining them in tip-top condition. But for roads where people shouldn't be driving more than 30 kilometers an hour on, or you know, at most 50 kilometers an hour in around in neighborhoods, I don't think that we need to be maintaining them at that 78 PQI. I think it's a waste of money. And so, you know, staff comes back with a bit of a different model that's modeled around an average for the different road types. I'd be more willing to look at spending money if we're looking at degradation on those main arterial roads. But at this point, you know, probably the majority of road length are on these smaller routes. You know, when you look at like the you know, how the city is set up and how many of them are, we could be spending money that we don't have to be, and especially at a time when, you know, we do hear a lot and from the council table about you know, the ever increasing expenditures. This is one area where, you know, probably would have very little notice if we set the standard high for the main roads where people are traveling at speed on that get the major wear, but allow for a little bit more wear on some of those smaller routes. So you know, I could bite my tongue and vote for option 2, so that'll pass. But option 1, I definitely couldn't go for. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll throw my 2 cents in. I'm voting against because I'm also for option 1. I've been dealing with a couple people that have back issues in their wheelchair that use the bus, and going off rough routes is extremely excruciating for them. We've had letters on that. So for me, I think that's one of our core responsibilities is infrastructure. We have a tendency to go into a lot of provincial downloads with no problems. So I really think we should be looking after our core infrastructure. So I will be voting against this, and if somebody puts the other motion forward, I'll be voting for that. Seeing no further discussion, call the question. All those in favor? Councillor Eastmere, Councillor Manley, and Councillor Giesbrecht. Sorry. Okay, all those opposed? Mayor Krog, Councillor Hemmons, Armstrong, and Perino. Motion fails. And Thorpe, sorry. I thought I said him. Motion, Councillor, or Mayor Thorpe. I'm very tired. You have to push your button so I can.
40 hours.
Okay, there you go. No, you're still not on. Try again. Should be there now.
Thank you. Yes, I'm on. I will move option 1, please.
Seconded by Councillor Thorpe. Call the question because we've had discussion. No, I'm calling the question. We've already had discussion. All those in favor? I see Councillor, Mayor Krog, that's what's throwing me off. Councillor Eastmere, Councillor,
Hammons.
I can't even think. Hammons, Thorpe, Prino, Manley, those opposed? Yeah, that's right. Counselor Gazelbreck, motion passes, thank you. Can we move straight on to the next, because it shouldn't take us anything but a vote? Well, you guys have the meeting, you're the ones that asked for this. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. We can move on, or I'm just
Take it all at once, takes 5 minutes.
just wondering if my staff are okay, because they can't leave their seats. So if they're okay to go through this report, hopefully it won't take too long.
Should take 5 minutes, because we can take them all at once.
So thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to seek council direction on the proposed resolutions for the 2024 Association of Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities, otherwise known as AVICC, 2024 Annual General Meeting. So there are 5 resolutions for your consideration today. One of those 5 has been brought forward by staff, and it is recommended by staff that you do move forward with that resolution, and the other 4 are for your discussion. Once council provides direction on the resolutions they would like to bring forward to AVICC, the required supporting backgrounders will be prepared, and those resolutions will be brought forward to the 2024 February 5th regular council meeting for endorsement, and then put forward to AVICC. Resolutions that are endorsed at AVICC will be forwarded to the UBCM convention for consideration and debate unless they are regional in nature, and then they'll be dealt with at the AVICC level. So that's it, Madam Chair. Any questions, and myself or staff can answer.
Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. I'm hoping we can separate the one that's.
Which one would you like separated?
I would like the one separated on shelters, put forward by staff, because I'm in the conflict of interest with.
We'll
as the
separate
executive
that, so we'll move with the first four first.
Yes, thank you.
Does anybody want to make that motion? Moved by Councillor Hemmons, it's seconded by Mayor Krog. Any discussion on the 4 resolutions? Seeing none, call the question. All in favor? All in favor. I'm not naming names, because I'll forget them all. And we'll excuse you for your conflict. And if we could go to, that is, where is it here? Number 5, emergency shelters in compliance with BC Building Code and BC Fire Code. Moved by Councillor Eastmere, seconded by Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion on that one? Call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Any questions, Ms. Scurry? We can call them back in. Seeing no questions, movement for adjournment, moved by Mayor Krog, seconded by Councillor Eastmere. All in favor? Motion carries. Meeting's adjourned.